Thank you for clicking on this video. I know it's very difficult to click on things. However, your job isn't over just yet. Before you sits Ben, previously known as Emery. Editing this video has driven him mad, and we need to ensure he's prepared to re-enter society following his mental imprisonment. It is your job to complete the sanity checklist. Audio prompt in 3, 2,
1. A long time ago, I was but a wee lad when Five Nights at Freddy's first came out, and I wasn't like all the others. I thought FNAF at Freddy's was a little baby game for tiny children. Admittedly, it kind of is, but that didn't stop me years later in middle school from becoming just like all the others. What drew me into FNAF in the first place was the story that I kept hearing so much about, and I got curious. And well, curiosity killed the cat. This proverbial cat representing the story has been dying for years. And this cat has become something that doesn't resemble a cat anymore. I love FNAF. I really do. It's meant so much to me for 6 or so years now. And it's been a story I hold near and dear to my heart, which is why it's really hard to watch the downfall of a genuinely engaging story into something that is indecipherable. I don't really know how to transition from this intro, so... For context, which none of you need, Five Nights at Freddy's That's Where I Want to Be is an indie horror game which was released on August 8th, 2014. Despite having a pre-development Kickstarter that raised $0 and 0 cents, the game blew up in popularity after some pretty big YouTubers got their filthy little hands all over it. The gameplay itself was really unique at the time, and even though almost every indie horror game since tried recreating something similar, FNAF definitely popularized this style of game. And for good reason. The game was perfect for YouTube videos. Jump scares that can be overreacted to. Repetitive gameplay that can be talked over with commentary, and easily divided sections for videos to start and stop at. The only thing the player is handed directly, story-wise, are nightly phone calls that give bare-bones exposition to justify sitting in a pizzeria that seems to run off a fucking car battery and uses electricity to have a giant metal door sit on the ground. And yet below that surface of what easily could have been a one-hit wonder, there's a deeper story. A story of tragedy, a story of reanimated animatronics containing the souls of children who were forced to forever haunt what had become their final resting place. A story that drew people back in after they had already dropped the game. This game was dark, it was self-contained, and was a masterclass in an alternative form of storytelling through indirect clues. FNAF 2 came around just 3 months after the first, which is not usually enough time to make a game, but against every single odd, I actually really enjoyed the game. And it's definitely one of my favorites in the franchise. If this game didn't come out, I absolutely would not be making this video, because this is the game that transformed a simple horror story into a sprawling puzzle to piece together. Instead of a couple lines and nightly phone calls and 4 newspaper clippings that just need to be lined up in the right order, which is really easy to do, we've now been given mini-games that add to the story, phone calls which need to be connected to the mini-games, which don't just function as independent pieces of lore, and empty puzzle pieces that had to be deciphered and guessed by the most dedicated of fans. And once all these pieces are put together, we get infinitely more context for the story of the first game. Not a lot of pieces of media can say that the sequel is better than the original. And while I disagree gameplay and scariness-wise being better, the story has gone from simply 5 kids being killed by a crazed murderer and possessing animatronics to a sprawling story of multiple tragedies. A story which gives us both context for what we already know and adds onto it naturally. And a story where the lore of the first game seems like nothing compared to the intricacies of trying to piece this story and timeline together with complex clues. There's no newspapers to be put in the right order. There's puzzle pieces that when originally being pieced together looked like the walls of a conspiracy theorist's closet. But when they finally made sense, it was satisfying to look at the journey that all of these fans went through to get where they ended up. What FNAF 2 proved is that the hidden lore in this game has opened the door for the story of the FNAF universe and how to find it being infinitely more complicated. Scott Cawthon knew he had an audience who were already dissecting his first game. He ran with it and gave them a challenge. While the story itself is complicated, it's no more complicated than most movies. It's just that the way the story is told is complicated. And I have to commend it on its boldness to tell a story so indirectly in a way that it feels like you're solving a mystery, in a way that other mystery media can't deliver. What FNAF has done up to this point is tell a story indirectly. It's not a mystery story, it's a story that's a mystery. As difficult solving all of this lore was, that's what made it so satisfying to piece it together. If every story in every form of media was told this same way, watching, reading, listening to, or playing anything would be insanely inaccessible, and most people wouldn't consume media anymore. But for this one story, it goes hard. And this is why FNAF 2, lore-wise, is my favorite FNAF game by far. I know I talked forever about FNAF 2. I promise it's probably the game I'll talk about the most. It's just since I love the lore and the story as it's told at this point. It's brilliant. But before I move on to FNAF 3, I really want to nitpick FNAF 2 for a dumbass reason. Because no game is perfect. It almost feels to me it was a last-minute decision to make this a prequel. All of the gameplay, character designs, and pre-release material seem to really heavily imply it being a sequel. Then small details like dates and some lines of dialogue
when the place eventually opens again, I'll probably take a night shift myself.
Were changed last minute to make it a prequel, I feel. And I don't know why Scott Cawthon would have wanted to do this if he did, but I feel it would have made the gameplay itself more consistent if it was thought of for the entirety of development. But hey, we're done with this game now, and I just wanted to talk about this because I don't really hear anyone talk about it, and it's really my only major critique of the game. FNAF 3, oh FNAF 3. I can't think of a lot of people who have strong opinions on this game. It falls into the same trap that Return of the Jedi did. Both were pretty good pieces of media. They finished out a trilogy, but their predecessor was one of the most acclaimed of the franchise. It's hard to top those expectations, but we're not looking at the gameplay itself. This was the big thing that turned people off from the game. The jump scares were pretty awful, and it was way easier than the first two games. But I think story-wise, it did a really good job finishing the trilogy. FNAF 3 had a lot of story to offer. The main plot of Purple Guy becoming Springtrap before burning to death at the end of this game, this was handed directly to us. But freeing the souls of the victims of the missing children incident, the good ending, was not, since we had to dial numbers into a fucking brick wall to play a cryptic minigame that makes no sense, just to get a good ending, which is just a different PNG than the bad ending. I know I'm a hypocrite saying this after having this trilogy's arm unreasonably far up my ass puppeteering me, but FNAF 3 is the weakest of the original trilogy in my eyes. Were the jump scares mid? Yeah. Was the game less scary than the first two? Yes. Was the game significantly easier than other FNAF games? For sure. But that doesn't ruin the game for me. I still enjoyed it, and I still think it's a proper ending for the story. I know horror stories just don't have happy endings most of the time, but FNAF sets itself apart in a ton of ways. I won't shut up about it, I know. But this is a story that has had enough buildup that letting the tragedies and their consequences end with peace is good storytelling. My critiques are gameplay critiques, not lore critiques. And with that, the story of FNAF could totally end there. Told through cryptic clues, no dialogue besides Phone Guy, and theories that put all the pieces together. I'd be happy if it ended there. I'd have no issues with it ending there. I wish it ended there. I don't have that many problems with FNAF 4, besides that it continued a story that had already ended in a satisfying way. And I can say this with complete confidence that I think FNAF 4 is the scariest FNAF game that Scott Cawthon made by far.
The first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
Before the game was released, a lot of people thought the character designs were over the top. It removed the original uncanny atmosphere of the original games. And well, I'd like to agree, this game is supposed to take place in the mind of a child who's already terrified of these animatronics. And the designs only work because the animatronics aren't animatronics. They're just in a nightmare. I cannot praise the atmosphere of this game enough. Well, this tonal shift is the first of many. This is the only one I actually enjoyed. Playing as a kid, frantically running around in their room, trying to fend off their greatest fears using nothing but a flashlight, is an insanely good premise. Using audio cues as a necessary part of the game was incredible at building immersion. When I first played this game at age 12, 13, I forget. This was the only game in the series that I couldn't finish because it scared me too much. I was really easy to scare at that age, but that being the only game in the series that did that to this degree says a lot. Okay, so I love the gameplay, but guess what I don't love? FNAF 3 ended the series, and FNAF 4 tried reopening it, and hey, this game doesn't touch the original story all that much, which is the big reason I'm not insanely bothered by it. The world stays consistent, it doesn't add lore, it expands on what we already know by adding depth. It's a story of a kid bullied by his brother and his friends over his fear of the animatronics, before the bullying goes too far and he ends up getting accidentally killed. The story is self-contained. It isn't a continuation of the original trilogy, it's its own thing. Almost all of my current criticisms would be gone if this was just a spin-off. Not a continuation, not the final chapter, which was unfortunately not the final chapter, but rather its own thing, a side story that builds the world, not the main story. For the most part, the 4 in the title is almost misleading. The only thing it complicated was adding the Bite of 83 alongside the Bite of 87. And this was for what? It just became confusing in a way that feels so easy to fix.
Was that the Bite of 87?
The crying child dying is the only reason it was a different bite. If the game just ended with a bear-induced lobotomy instead of a death, it would have told a story that needed to be told. I'm also not the biggest fan that this story is handed to us. There's no newspapers put together, no mini-games without dialogue that need to be deciphered. The big thing I've been praising this franchise for storytelling-wise was the story being told indirectly. With this gone, it ruins part of what made the franchise unique in the first place. There's still cryptic shit, but it is nowhere near the level of the past few games. Now, there's one problem left with this game's story that I want to talk about. I will put you back together. Why did that plush bear have to say, I will put you back together at the end of this game? Through this whole game, we assume that the Fredbear plush is just an inner monologue of the crying child. Making it have a mind of its own right at the end of the game is like a slap in the face. I know this is tiny, but it represents something greater. Loose ends were tied up in FNAF 3. The only questions left were things that were more or less unimportant to the story. What I wish was a spin-off just left a loose end to tie up. I know this seems tiny, and it would have been if this video had the honor of just ending here. But it doesn't. This is where things start making me really mad. Scott Cawthon announced that a Five Nights at Freddy's book was coming out. I wish that Five Nights at Freddy's book did not come out, because this is the exact moment that defines the downward trajectory of this story, and that downfall was fast. I'm not going to pretend I read all of the Silver Eyes.
Wow, that's a lot of words. Too bad I'm not reading them.
Maybe this makes me less credible. I just know the ripple from it and the basic summary from Wikipedia. So I'll stay in my lane and just say a couple things. They gave a name to Purple Guy. I don't like this at all. Part of the appeal of FNAF for me was the ambiguity and mystery. Not every single detail of this world needs to be explained, and sometimes less is more. Why the fuck is William Afton the co-owner of Freddy Fazbear's? Purple Guy being an unnamed murderer hiding in plain sight as an ordinary employee grounds the story. Purple Guy didn't need a name. That ruins how cryptic the series was originally. It gave it charm. Afton being the owner of Freddy's recontextualizes a pizzeria debilitated by tragedy, with the owners scrambling to stay afloat, into just a front for a psychopath to kill kids. The release of this book not only opened up a closed story again, but it made this story something entirely different than the first 4 games, that it almost feels like an entirely new universe. Well, guess what? It is. Scott Cawthon confirmed it's its own continuity. So we can rest easy knowing that this is in fact its own thing, and the mainline series ended untouched.
She can dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
Jesus fucking Christ, this game pisses me off so much. I don't even know where to begin. There's just so much I hate about it. This game does not resemble Five Nights at Freddy's at all. Half of the lore makes no sense and retroactively ruins almost the entire story and timeline. And it changes the entire format and style of the franchise. The worst additions that the Silver Eyes had to the story are now canon, but somehow they made parts of it even worse. Not only is William Afton now Purple Guy and co-founder Freddy Fazbear's, he's also now like a mad scientist. The most advanced technology we saw in this universe up to this point was the toy animatronics in FNAF 2 having facial recognition, which is still grounded enough in reality for it to not be too out of place considering all the supernatural elements of the franchise. But Sister Location is one of the earliest in the timeline, as in the mid-80s. And yet the technology in it is so much more advanced than any other game before this in the franchise. This game is before FNAF 1 and 2, but we have these sci-fi murder robots that systematically kidnap and kill kids for some reason. Why did Purple Guy, fucking William Afton, even kill kids in the first place if he could just use his animatronics that are designed for killing kids? Now, I know games sometimes do something vastly different than the other games in their franchise. And sometimes that works really well. Breath of the Wild did it to perfection. Even though that game introduced sci-fi elements and had a completely different Hyrule than what we saw up to that point, it didn't try rewriting that earlier story, it just added onto it. And it took place thousands of years after the other games, so of course the world and technology would change. But Sister Location acted like the games always took place in this futuristic sci-fi world. It completely ruins the immersion and it rewrites every single game in the franchise. FNAF 1 makes no sense to be running off technology that was grounded in reality for the 90s, more or less, knowing that the Funtime animatronics exist. FNAF 2's pizzeria is state-of-the-art, but it is nothing compared to the Funtime animatronics. FNAF 3 takes place in the modern day, as in 2023, the year we're in. But Sister Location, which takes place like 40 years prior, is more advanced by a long shot. And now in the FNAF 4 minigames, you're actually playing as William Afton's son, and then his other son, who you play as in this game, Michael, is the one who got his brother killed and is the one having the nightmares, which are the main gameplay of FNAF 4. Or FNAF 4 was real so that William could scare his kids into not going near his sci-fi murder robots by using nightmare animatronics who are actually also sci-fi murder robots. I consider myself very invested in the lore, and yet this is where plot holes become large enough that I have no clue what's a theory and what's fact anymore. Because sometimes it's both, but never confirmed because there's no other way to explain the mess this game created. The sci-fi bullshit doesn't end there, because Michael Afton also has his fucking skeleton pulled out from his body and his skin worn by a robot, and then he somehow lives because of something called remnant, which is some sort of life energy, I think, which was how the souls of the dead kids possess the animatronics. This isn't even a ghost story anymore. They tried explaining the only and yet incredibly major supernatural element away by saying it's all just theoretical science. Why can't this just be a ghost story? I wanted a ghost story. It was a ghost story. It is now not a ghost story. At this point, it's almost pointless to have such a small complaint in comparison, but why can the animatronics talk now? They've never been able to before this point, but now they have every game after. It's stupid. It removes the uncanny valley-ness, as though every other element of this game didn't already do that. Honestly, the story of this game on its own is solid, and I wouldn't have nearly as many problems with it if it was just a new franchise. Just replace Funtime Freddy and Foxy with new characters, which would be insanely easy to do, and it's a new universe. The world is entirely different, the gameplay is entirely different, basically everything, except some lines of dialogue and 2 animatronics are entirely different. It kind of feels like the Five Nights at Freddy's name was slapped onto this, because Scott Cawthon knew there'd be a built-in audience. And there was. But it also ruined the entirety of the franchise's story because of it. Animatronics aren't an exclusively Five Nights at Freddy's thing, and it makes sense for Scott Cawthon to reuse that concept in a new franchise, and I wish he did. But even though this game ruins everything timeline-wise, and even if you excuse the plot holes and imagine this was the universe intended all along, the FNAF story is now one of a broken family, with 2 dead kids, with a father who kills kids and is also the co-founder of a kids' pizza place, who also gets killed by his own creation as a result of being scared by ghost kids. But also, the ghost kids aren't ghosts, they're actually sci-fi theoretical life energy, and also his alive kid is trying to end the tragedy his dad caused, and also he's the protagonist in every single game up to this point, and he kept changing his name, even though seeing the universe through different glimpses and perspectives was really cool and unique. And now he's hunting for his dad, who is now dead and inside an animatronic, even though we thought that animatronic burnt to death.
What happened to the original plot of the movie? What happened to the original plot of the movie?
Oh, also the game's story is kind of handed to us, and I didn't like that. At this point, the timeline is a disaster. None of it makes sense, there's massive tonal shifts, and yet Pizzeria Simulator did the best it could with a beyond broken franchise. I still have immense problems with the larger story, but I'm gonna use my Star Wars analogy again, because I like it a lot. Pizzeria Simulator is the Revenge of the Sith to sister location's Phantom Menace. It did its best to end a shitty story strong. Is this game peak FNAF? Not really. But the gameplay is kind of the most similar to FNAF 1 that we've had. The daytime sections, obviously not. They kind of just fuck with the lore in ways I really don't like, adding in useless animatronics that for some reason are now relevant to the story, I think. But in the night sections, we get the salvage minigames that are, in my opinion, honestly tied with FNAF 4 for the most tense of the franchise. The nights themselves are kind of fusion of FNAF 1 and 3, which takes the best elements of 3, making the gameplay infinitely better than a lot of the games in the franchise, in my opinion. I know this is an unpopular opinion, but it is objectively right, says me, who is correct about everything. Even though the story is leagues better than Sister Location, it's still a bit There's an insane amount of plot holes. How did Henry call all the animatronics there? What does Midnight Motorist even mean? Why are there now 2 Fritzes and 2 Jeremys? Does that mean Mike Schmidt doesn't have to be Michael Afton? Which parts of the books are actually canon to the games? This isn't even all of it. These questions don't really have answers, so it's kind of pointless for me to try figuring them out right here and now. And thus my complaints change course. The art direction of this game is really inconsistent. The night and day sections on their own are solid if you separate them, but both of them being in the same game is very visually clashing. You have your nighttime sections, which resemble something from the FNAF 3 era, like I said, but your daytime sections are more the FNAF World style, and for what they are, both function on their own well. When you jump from this to this in 10 seconds, it feels a bit jarring. It feels like a completely different game. Removing consistency from stories removes the natural flow of the stories. Just a quick aside that I noticed, Scott Cawthon doesn't like reusing models from previous games. Every single game has new models for the animatronics, even if they appeared before. He doesn't have to do this, and it results in things like Scrap Trap. I respect the self-imposed limitation, it just sometimes bites him in the ass. But it also gives us things like the withered animatronics, so It's not all bad. There's another major plot hole that I haven't talked about. The puppet's soul was already freed in the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3. I know that mask fell slower than the others, but I still just think this is a retcon to work in that Henry's daughter, Charlie, is the puppet. I honestly have a lot to praise this game for. The cryptic minigames, which needed to be pieced together, are finally back. The minigames we got in FNAF 4 and Sister Location were pretty obvious what they meant, but Pizzeria Simulator finally brought back having to piece stuff together. While I can critique the story all day long, there's more plot holes than answers, and it's significantly less strong than the first 4 games story-wise. The ending is insanely fucking good.
And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, friend.
This is one of the most impactful and badass speeches I have ever heard in a video game. Having Henry in the games might be the only element added from the books that I actually like, purely because of this. While I hate the second trilogy's impact on the lore and kinda everything it stands for, storytelling-wise, this ending monologue ties up every loose end that remains. If I had to choose a way to end this bad story out strong, this speech is absolutely the best option. Much like the first trilogy, the story is finally tied up. No need to reopen it. Because it's over. End of video. Yay. Help Wanted is a really good game. Like, insanely good. Like my favorite game in the franchise good. Honestly, it might be my favorite VR game. Just being there with all these animatronics and places we've seen in the games gives so much perspective. These animatronics are massive, and you don't realize it until this game. What you'd think were human-sized animatronics are towering over you, and it is fucking terrifying. Both that and how immersive VR is just adds so much. It makes this game 10 times scarier than all the others. I cannot praise the gameplay enough. There was not a single section of this game where I wasn't scared, even if slightly. The remastered old content is better than ever, and the new gameplay is perfectly crafted, for the most part. I 100%ed this game when it first came out. This is definitively the best VR horror game by a long shot. I just love it so much. But we're not talking about the gameplay today, are we? This game didn't need a story. It honestly didn't. It was an almost perfect spin-off, but Steel Wool made the mistake of trying to force in lore, just because it was such a staple in the franchise up to this point. I would have considered the FNAF franchise near perfect if we got the first 3 or 4 games and then this spin-off came out years later without any lore. But we were not given that privilege. It wasn't the worst storytelling in the franchise up to this point by a long shot, but it's pretty bad. It honestly doesn't even resemble Five Nights at Freddy's when it comes to the story. Saying that all the other FNAF games are part of an in-universe franchise made by a crazed lunatic is just a lazy way to explain away all the plot holes of the original games. If this was like the only lore in the game and was just a tongue-in-cheek joke, I wouldn't really care. But knowing that it's canon just makes this story so unsatisfying. I didn't bring it up earlier, but in FNAF 4, something similar was almost done. A big theory at the time was that all the games were part of the crying child's dreams, and this was probably the original intent. But it wasn't confirmed and had very little merit on its own, which is why I ignored it. But the same way people didn't like that, I have all the same critiques with the entire series just canonically being a video game franchise. While that's minor on its own, the game was an in-universe game based on other in-universe games, meaning the lore is all from the real world. Also meaning the only canon FNAF game is Security Breach, which just has awful implications, but I'll get to that in a sec. Game developers having malicious malware that's causing harm in the real world, and it's trying to escape the game they made that it's trapped in is honestly an incredible story concept. This isn't in the script, but I just realized that this is the plot of Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase.
Oh, hello, Mr. Phantom.
This plot isn't FNAF. Oh, yeah, I just said that. But I'm pretty sure at this point in the timeline, it was supposed to be William Afton's Save Consciousness uploaded to the game. The story of Purple Guy / William Afton has ended twice, and he's back. Again. Let this man just die, please. This game has a good story. It's just an awful FNAF story, and we're looking at the FNAF lore, not the standalone stories of each game. All the games up to this point have good stories in my opinion, just not when viewed as pieces of a whole. Saying security breach is bad is like saying kittens dying is bad. Hardly anyone disagrees. Except these kittens are once again proverbial. See what I did there? Being murdered at the hands of the corporate machine known as the video game industry. Which is just a fancy way of saying that I think this game is shit. I know people were begging around the FNAF 3 era for a free roam FNAF game, and this is the perfect example of how a lot of people are stupid. This game is not remotely scary. You know when every jump scare is gonna happen because the animatronics are never unpredictable. You see where they're coming from at all times. The character designs don't look like FNAF remotely. But we did get Roxanne Wolf out of it, and she's kinda high. I've been told that for the sake of my digital footprint, I should not say that Roxanne Wolf is hot. I could tear this story to shreds, if it was even notable enough for me to remember it all. I'm gonna be honest in a way that hurts my credibility again, but I didn't finish the last third of this game. I was gonna, but I guess I realized I was not enjoying playing it at all. I know the important parts though. William Afton is back. In the flesh. Again, but you may reasonably ask yourself how this is even possible, and that question is answered in a fucking series of books that we don't know the canon status of. Supposedly, New Alive William and Glitch Trap are both some spirit animatronic? I have no clue, but it's called The Mimic and is the largest retcon I've ever seen when they realized everyone hated William Afton coming back again. So of course, it's all just a shapeshifter. Great storytelling. A+. Then Molten Freddy is back, I think. It's either that or Golden Freddy merged with a ton of animatronics. I have no clue. Either way, opening another closed hole. I hate this game, but I had really high expectations for it. You guys might have realized that there's been this Vanning plush behind me for the whole video, and I didn't just get it as some ironic commentary for this video. When trailers were first coming out for this game, it looked sick as fuck to me. I knew it was taking place in the far future, so I was fine excusing the sci-fi aesthetic to an extent. I knew it didn't look like FNAF, really, but Help Wanted was so good that I thought I'd be pleasantly surprised. I was not pleasantly surprised. I had bought this plush purely because I thought the character design looked cool. All the stuff about being super hyped for the game. I was so let down when it came out by the gameplay, story, and basically everything about it. I know the big theory that the story was changed last minute to be way worse, and I think it's probably true. But we got the end product we did, and that end product is shit.
Now, this would be the time I'd talk about Ruin, but as of filming this video, it hasn't been out too long and I haven't played it yet, so I won't be talking about it.
Speaking of things I'm not talking about, now that we've gotten through all the games I wanted to cover, I want to explain why I didn't cover some. A lot of you probably noticed that I entirely glossed over FNAF World, Ultimate Custom Night, and Special Delivery, the AR game. That's because I don't really think any of them are important to the broader story enough that talking about them would change the video that much. I'm filming this video on the night of August 8th, 2023, the 9th anniversary of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game coming out.
It took me a little while to finish editing this one.
Really, the main thing this makes me think about is that the future of this franchise can go anywhere, and it already is. Help Wanted 2 is coming out later this year, which is really exciting to me because I already talked about how much I liked the first game, but not sure I should set my expectations for Steel Wool that high anymore. I'm prepared for another security breach situation. The FNAF movie is coming out in just a couple months, and I could not have more mixed opinions on it. I don't think in any world it's going to be a cinematic masterpiece. It's looking to be a PG-13 horror movie, but I'm hoping it's at least somewhat good. Scott Cawthon said it's based on the first 3 games, which is a good sign, but it's looking like Vanessa's in the movie, which is a little, worrying. It's obviously a new universe than both the games and the books, so I'm hoping it's a good universe. This franchise means a lot to me, and I'd be pretty sad if they messed it up. A lot of the trailer looks good, but a lot of it also doesn't. William Afton being in it means it's not exclusively based on the first 3 games, but Mike Schmidt seems to be a different character than Michael Afton in this, which hopefully means this won't be a story of family, but rather returning to the ghost story origin. Of course, I'll probably be proven wrong when they do one of those dumbass fake-outs where we find out he was Michael Afton all along, or something stupid like that. Also, the FNAF cookbook is coming out. I think something that you guys will be a little surprised by is that I hardly played any of the games to make this video. I knew the lore pretty well and kind of just fact-checked it and based my gameplay opinions on the last time I fully played the games. Making this whole video made me want to replay them again, which is why I decided to return to some of my 2020 roots, I won't elaborate on that, and start a Twitch channel. And if we can get to 500 followers on the account, I will stream all of the FNAF games beginning to end, and almost all of the muscle memory and non-lore details completely gone from my head. The link to my Twitch should be right near the top of the description and also on screen right now, somewhere. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you considered following me over on Twitch. I guess to close out the video, I want to say that I think FNAF as a whole is way more good than bad. Every story in the franchise besides Security Breach is a good standalone story, and these stories mean a lot to me, which is why I care so much when they divert from the original plot to such a great extent. But because of that, the main plot at this point is just a tangle of plot threads that we can't tell which threads are resolved and which aren't. The story has just gotten less consistent with each game, and I wish there was a way we could just return to the original simple ghost story. But hey, we've already been over it. Thanks for watching. So, I just finished filming, and the fucking sun is coming up.